Let's continue chapter 6. All right, page 110. This is from easement by necessity. When it's necessary to cross over someone else's property to gain access to yours. This is a poor example in this drawing that they have in the book. I don't know why you can't just cut down a tree and put a driveway to your own property. But let's just pretend you're in one of these super uh, these areas where you got these super activists that they'll chain themselves to a tree and not allow you to cut it down. So they'll throw you in jail for the rest of your life if you do cut down a tree and put it in the driveway. So you got to cross over your neighbor's property in order to get to yours. Okay, that's an easement by necessity, and it is for the purpose of ingress and egress when there's no other way to get on your property but to cross over someone else's. All right, so this is a bad example, really, but I'll show you a couple of others once you guys have these highlights. Do you have these highlights yet, or I'm not sure if we did these previously or not.
Yeah, I have it.
Yeah, everybody got them?
Yep, we got it.
All
Yes.
right. So, yeah, I'll give you a couple different examples here. Here's another example of easement by necessity. When you got lot owner A and lot owner B's property is completely surrounded by lot owner A's. And so they have a little access road to get to, it's not the driveway, it's a little access road to get to their property where they have their house and driveway and all that stuff. Um, so this little access road, if it were to be covered by snow, who's responsible for removing the snow?
A,
A. And why is that?
because he wants the land
Because it's their
boundaries.
property, yeah. And if a tree falls over that uh, road, it is their responsibility to remove it because you cannot, if somebody has an easement right, if they have a right, you can't impede or take away their rights. So if a tree fell over that road, it is lot owner A's responsibility to get that tree cleared as soon as possible so that lot owner B can have access to their property for ingress and egress, entrance and exit. Here's another common example that we probably see when we have shared driveways. Neither house over here, lot owner A on the left or B on the right, has enough land in order to put a driveway to get to their backyard where their garage is or their parking lot or whatever. So it's partially on both of their properties. And here's the green line is the property line. So it is partially on both of the properties. And these really require good neighbors. Otherwise, you're going to have somebody that's going to park their car in a driveway, they're going to block it. The other's not going to have access, and then we're going to have all kinds of fights and arguments between neighbors. Um, I've seen that good neighbors and bad neighbors when it comes to these situations with shared driveways. Me personally, I'd rather avoid them, but they're out there. There's a lot of them out there, especially when the real estate's at a premium and they design these houses like this. I guess in the old days when people were more courteous too. So you can't have arguments between people, especially when they say, well, you know what? That driveway is mostly on my property, so it's my driveway. I'm allowing you to use it. I'll just put a chain, I'll put a gate up and put a chain on the gate if you keep parking there. I'll prevent you from getting access to your garage. No, you can't, because they have a right to get to their garage, and that would be um, violating their rights. All right. And we went over this in chapter 20, but here, let's go over it now again. The easement by prescription through adverse possession. When you've used someone else's property for a period of time is defined by law. Um, and it is you've been using it against their permission, hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use must have been out in the open, visible, and notorious. And if you've been using somebody's property for the amount of time as prescribed by law, which varies from state to state, um, you can take them to court to perfect the claim of an easement by prescription. An easement by prescription is not automatic where you become the owner of that land simply because you've been using it. You have to see, this is where a lot of people get this wrong, and then they all of a sudden they become internet smart because they think that they know the law because they got a little bit of knowledge. With the stress there on a little bit of knowledge. You know, we get people all the time that they're like, yeah, they think they know it all because they got a little bit of knowledge. I learned it on the internet. It's got to be true. And sometimes they're learning things on the internet, but they don't learn all of the story. They don't get the big picture. So they think if a house is vacant, they could just move into it and then claim it adverse possession. Doesn't work like that. So we'll get into it, and I'll show you a couple of examples of these people and what happens to them when they do crap like that. And yet worse, there's a lot of videos on YouTube showing people how to make money through adverse possession. You don't even need to own the house. You could take over someone's house and claim adverse possession, and while it's in fighting, you could rent it out to someone and make money. Yeah, if you want to go to jail, you know, I submitted so many complaints to YouTube about these videos where people are telling you how you could get rich on, you know, getting real estate through adverse possession, and it is the furthest thing from the truth. They're encouraging people to break the law, but YouTube says it doesn't go against their terms of services. I guess maybe if I said something political against their, you know, against their beliefs or their values in that regard, I'd probably be banned or they'd cancel my account. But you try to point out the fact that someone's encouraging you to break the law doesn't go against the terms of their service. So be careful what you see there on YouTube, guys. So through the process of, okay, now that prescriptive period is the amount of time is prescribed by law. It's 30 years for improved lands and 60 years for unimproved lands that we need to know for our exams there. That law is going to be changed in the future. They're going to do away with the 30-year and 60-year period and go with the common law 20-year period. But they've been working on that for, I forget if it was somewhere between 14 and 16 years already. And it's just been sitting there now, that legislation that they are all agreed on, but they just haven't voted on it yet. It's just sitting there waiting for them to take up a vote. Now, since then, there's so much legislation that's been passed in the state. Things like a new gas tax. You know, they want to raise the gas tax. What did it take them to do that, a year or two ago? What did it take them, 30 days? From drafting a law to voting on it and passing it took them like 30 days. Now, this is a problem. This creates a problem because they created too many laws that covered the same topic, and now there's a conflict in the law. So no judge can rule on these things, these matters now, because there's a conflict in the law until the politicians clear it up. And we don't want a judge ruling on these things because that's going to create a whole heck of problems all on its own for them legislating from the bench. So we're waiting for the politicians to, because the one judge already kicked it back to the politicians in New Jersey to fix. But once again, it's been many years now, and they still haven't done it. So the book manufacturers are all discombobulated. They don't know if it's 30 years or 60 years or if it's 20 years. They're kind of guessing at it, how they write it in the book. But I'm telling you what the deal is right now. So for exams, you're going to go with 30 years for improved lands and 60 years for unimproved lands, knowing that at some day in the future, they're going to get rid of these 30-year and 60-year periods, and they're just going to go with the common law. Common law is a law that's common in all the states. So they're going to go with that common law period. But many other states did away with they got to specifically undo the common law and go with their own laws if they're going to do them, but they didn't do that here. So now they're going to do that someday. So through the process of tacking, you don't need to be the only person that was using the property for 30 years or 60 years in order to claim adverse possession. You could be a successor in interest, like a landlord and a tenant, an ancestor and an heir, a seller and a buyer. They can add one person's time of possession to that of another, combining them to reach the prescriptive period to be able to take that property. See, this is really meant for, in most states, was really created for the purposes of farmland. But it doesn't specifically say it's for farmland. It's any property as long as it's been used out in the open. It must be continuous, hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use must be visible, open, and notorious, and as long as it is and it meets those conditions, you could claim adverse possession. Now, the way to prevent somebody from claiming that adverse possession that some people refer to as squatters' rights, even though squatters don't have rights, but I guess if they're there long enough, and the owner sees it and they're angry about it, they never gave permission, but they did not do anything to get them off their property. That person can claim ownership at one point in court of law. So an owner can take legal action against any adverse possessor to remove them. These are the ways to prevent someone from claiming an easement by prescription. They could cut off their access, maybe putting a fence off around the area to prevent their continuous use, and that resets the time clock. Or they could give them permission. You can't claim an easement without the owner's permission, with the owner's permission to use the land. It has to be hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without their approval. So if they gave you permission, you can't claim an easement by prescription. And an easement by prescription cannot be claimed against publicly owned land. So we should have these highlights on page 111 now. Get them highlights done and then let me know when you got it done, okay?
Got it.
Anybody still highlighting or is everybody done?
Just finish. I'm good.
Done. It's done.
So, and this is from chapter 20, so you don't got to go highlighting this now. We already got that highlighted because we already did chapter 20. We jumped ahead there. Adverse possession is another means of involuntary transfer of title. An owner may lose title to another person who has some claim on the land, takes possession, and most importantly, uses the land. And in New Jersey, a person may acquire title by adverse possession through the continuous, open, notorious, hostile, and exclusive occupation of another person's property for 30 years for improved lands, 60 years if they're vacant woodlands. After that time, or unimproved woodlands, after that time, the user may perfect the claim to title to land through a legal process known as adverse possession by bringing a court suit to quiet title. So through the process known as tacking, okay, we could add on one person's time to that of the other. Now, once an adverse user is established title, the former owner has no recourse. They lost the ownership. To prevent such loss of title, every person having a right to title to real estate must inspect their property at least once every 30 years. Hey, if you don't notice in 30 years that somebody's been living on your property, do you really need that property anyway? You know, and property owners who feel the new government requirements, because they put so many laws and rules in place, um, have taken away the rights to use or develop their property, they could seek damages under the concept of something known as inverse condemnation. Now, the burden is on the owners who must prove the government's action has taken the rights without compensation. And that shouldn't be too hard to do because it would be in all of the uh, building codes and setback lines and environmental laws and stuff that they put together that basically rendered your property useless. That's when government just creates too many damn rules, and to the point that you can't really use your property and they've taken away value from it. All right, so here's one listing that I had one time in Piscataway. It was in Piscataway. This was the property right here. It was a corner property, but it wasn't the total. It didn't go all the way to the corner because there was a grassy lot that was owned by the city over here that they were using. They cut the grass for it for years and everything. They had a volleyball net set up on it. But to prevent any buyers that were coming to look at this property from thinking that, wow, this is a double-sized lot. It's a huge lot that these people have. Why not just put a fence around it all? Because it was just a fence around this part. I had to make it a point in the listing that the beyond the fence to the corner is not their property. It's a city lot. Now, they could have asked the city for a public grant for them to grant them the ownership because the city hasn't been out there to cut the grass in years. They've been cutting it. But I guess they didn't know to ask that. It would also probably increase the taxes that the city could charge them because now they got a bigger piece of land. But this was a city lot right here on the corner where the roads split on both sides. But that's not their property. It was the city's. So we have to make sure that potential buyers don't get the idea that this is a part of this property and it's just one big property. So I had to spell that out there for them. Dedication is when you give land to the government for a greater public good. In this example, you have somebody who has this entire thing is their one property. It's their one lot. Now they subdivided it into 6, and they were going to build 6 houses, and then they put a cul-de-sac street on it. So that's what you call those streets that you go down that are dead ends, and then they got the big circle at the end that you could turn around. It's called a cul-de-sac. This parcel of land was owned by a private party, and they subdivided it and added a cul-de-sac street. The street is on private property, so it's privately owned and must be maintained by the owner. However, it can be given to the government through dedication. By dedicating the land to the city, and then the city would be responsible for maintaining it over the years, clearing the snow, making sure it gets repaved when it needs to be, and so on and so forth. So a cul-de-sac, this street was built on private property, so the person who owns the property can name it, but then they'll dedicate it to the municipality and it'll become a public street. All they got to do is in their plans when they submit for development, they have to put here that this is the street they're building and that they're going to dedicate it or keep it private for some reason. There's no benefit to that. I don't know why you would. Okay. All right. Here's a little episode from Cash Cab. Anybody ever see this show on the Game Show Network or when it was on regular TV years ago? It's basically it's basically a game show that takes place in a taxi, and you had this comedian driving a taxi and asking people random trivia questions to see if they could get the answers, and then they could make money on the taxi ride. If they got three questions wrong, he would pull over and kick them out wherever they were. So it's an interesting show. You can see repeats of it on the Game Show Network still today, which is where I got this from. So let me make sure that this is loud enough for everybody here, and let me try to jack up the volume a bit and see if you guys can get the answer on this. All right, I'll play it a couple times. Let me jack up the volume, and here we go.
What term for a dead-end street means bottom of a bag in French? Ooh.
Did you guys hear that?
Yes.
What term for a dead-end street means bottom of a bag in French? Ooh. What term for a dead-end street means bottom of a bag in French?
Anybody?
Cul-de-sac.
Cul-de-sac. Yeah, we just went over that.
Ooh, ooh. Is it cul-de-sac? I'm afraid it is. Cul-de-sac is correct.
There you go. So you would have won $50 on Cash Cab for that question. All right. Here, I got another trivia question from Cash Gab. Give us a little levity while we're at it here. Unfortunately, I only have two of these throughout the class, but you know, when I see things that are related to real estate, I like to try to video them, maybe even put them in this in our class here. Here's another question for you. See if you get this trivia one. This is something we have not gone over.
These next questions are worth $50 each.
Yeah, let me try to raise the volume here a little bit. I don't know, it seems a little quiet.
What Chinese spatial philosophy is used to determine sites for graves and house design?
What Chinese spatial philosophy is used
Feng
to
Shui.
determine sites for graves and house design?
Feng Shui.
Feng Shui, let's see.
These next questions are worth $50 each. What Chinese spatial philosophy is used to determine sites for graves and house design? That is correct.
There you go, you got it. Feng Shui.
These next questions.
All right, that was it for those questions. That's it for the trivia games. Although we could have plenty of our own trivia games with our key terms to review at the end of the chapter. All right, so here's another example of how you could stop someone from, well, I got a couple things. How you could prevent someone from gaining an easement by prescription, but also let's give a little drawing here. We got lot owner A on the left and lot owner B on the right. The property line is right here in the center where the black line is. However, there's a fence here, and that fence was there for 30 years. If that fence is there for 30 years, can lot owner A claim ownership of all of this land?
If it was not for 30 years.
I'm sorry?
If it was not for 30 years?
No, it was used for 30. This fence has been here for 30 years.
Okay.
Can lot owner A claim the ownership of this land here?
No.
Why not?
If it is more than 30 years, then he cannot. But
No.
if it is,
It's
No.
not from woodland.
No. If he's been using it for at least 30 years, it's improved land, meaning that there's houses on it. There's some kind of man-made improvements there. That's all that's required is 30 years for that to be there in order to claim ownership of that land. Now, lot owner B can prevent lot owner A from getting that ownership if they take them to court to get them off their property and stop using it. They could give them permission to use the land to keep the fence there or use that land, but then they have to, and then tell them, hey, I'm going to send them a certified letter that allows them, that lets them know that the fence is on their property, and they could keep it there till the end of the month, but they need to get it removed by then and put it where it belongs. By doing this, you reset the time clock. so they can't claim that easement by prescription unless they keep it there for another 30 years, which is plenty of time to give lot owner B to get it removed. And then they could also cut off the access by putting up a fence right on the property line. Lot owner B can put up a fence right on the property line, cutting off their direct access to this area, and once again, resetting the time clock. Now, who put this fence there to begin with? Oh, I don't know. It could have been a previous owner. Both of them could have moved in there when it was already there. It should have came up in a survey if they did a survey, but maybe they didn't do a survey. Or maybe they've been there a very long time and they forget. Maybe it was somebody's father or that previously owned the house that put that there. It could have been lot owner B that put that fence in the property line, just trying to be a good neighbor because they weren't sure where exactly the property line is. So they put it in a little bit just to be a good neighbor. Then lot A owner just took advantage of it. Or it could have been lot owner A put it over there. We don't know. Okay. Sometimes these are things that people really don't know who put that fence there. So don't guess at it. Don't assume because
Victor,
yeah.
so this time clock will start can start after 30 years when he takes it to the court, the B takes it to the court.
No. It has to be there for at least 30 years if it's improved lands to take it to court. That's the prescription period. That's prescribed by law. It needs to be there for at least 30 years. You need to be occupying someone else's land, using it out in the open. It's obvious. Lot owner B can see it, but they take no action to remove it or remove you for 30 years.
All right.
Then lot owner A can take them to court to claim ownership of it. If it's woodlands, then that's 60 years it needs to be used for. Okay, so you see this fence there, you know it's on your property and they've been using it. It makes no sense for you to just be complaining about it all the time. You need to take them to court to get them to remove it. Now, sometimes people, when I say, well, how could you get them to, prevent them from claiming an easement by prescription? And I give these three options here. And then I get some people, they say, well, why don't you just rip down the fence yourself? Well, because if that is lot owner A's fence, if they're the one that put it there, you're destroying their property, even though it's on your property. And then they could require you to pay them for that too. Look, if I park my car in your driveway, can you take a sledgehammer to it?
No.
Sure you can, but you'll probably you'll probably have some consequences. You'll have to pay me for the damages that you did. You can't just start smashing somebody's car because they parked it in your driveway, But
so parking a car is a different thing, but this is kind of encroachment.
How's it different? If my property, my car is parked in your driveway, how's that any different from me building a fence on your property and then you breaking that down and ripping it out? You're destroying my property either way. You see what I'm talking about? So you could be held responsible for the damage that you've done in either case, even though I wasn't where I was supposed to be. I put my car or my fence on your property. Well, you should have gotten me to remove it. Call the cops, file a complaint, take me to court. But you can't take it into your own. You can't take it into your own hands and just destroy my property, because then I could take you to court, require you to pay me for that, the value of that. Now, I guess that's considerably less than losing your land, but still, just be aware that if you do, there will be consequences for that too.
Yes, got it. Thanks.
And when I asked, who put that fence there, and we made a couple of assumptions, maybe it was A, maybe it was B. Well, don't ever assume anything with boundary line disputes, because you know what happens when you assume?
You must never assume Because when you assume, you make an ass out of you and me.
That's the late great Benny Hill right there. He had a hilarious show if anybody remembers him.
I
Ben-
do. I grew up on that show.
Oh my God, Benny Hill, he was the best. That little guy, that little bald guy, that was his father in real life, you know that?
Did, I
The
did
one he
not
always
know
slapped
that.
his head, he always slapped his head and kicked his butt.
I did
That was
not
his,
know that.
yeah, that was his father. That was great. All right. Here we're going to have an attorney actually explain to you the easement process on what attorneys go through in order to claim an easement by prescription. All right. It's very informative, a little bit dry, but very informative. The recording isn't the best. I tried to improve it the best that I could, but so I'll make sure the sound is up there that you could hear it. But and let's see, do we still have the optimization for the video sharing? We do. So let's listen to this attorney explain how one would claim adverse possession in the eyes of a lawyer.
For an attorney or for just a property owner, I think a lot of times people don't even realize that this body of law exists. Maybe when you own your first home or you get your first survey, you start to realize how important boundaries can be. My name is Jessica Shrestha. I'm an attorney at Wheeler, Van Sickle, and Anderson. That's here in Madison, Wisconsin. The concept of adverse possession is that, well, first you start, everyone has a deed to their property. There's a legal description, there's a boundary, whether it's a lot or something else, specific distances, and that's your boundary. But as everyone knows, it's hard to figure out where those are, and a lot of times actual occupation on the ground doesn't necessarily match the real boundary lines. Sometimes it's a matter of a few inches, but sometimes it gets to be, we're talking feet, acres, a whole 40-acre parcel sometimes. And it turns out that if you occupy and use an area of property for long enough and treat it as your own property, the doctrine of adverse possession makes that your property by law. It's more complicated exactly how that applies, but that's the basic concept. Over time, property can become yours even if you don't have a deed that describes it. Adverse possession comes up most often for a typical property owner with a fence. That's really the classic example, and that has been for as long as we've had real property and the law of adverse possession. Someone will construct a fence, and even if they get a survey to tell them exactly where the property line is, they might construct their fence a foot inside their property. They want to make sure they can stay on the other side, for example, or a foot on the other side. Sometimes it's a greater distance. And over time, they forget. Or maybe they didn't know where the exact boundary was in the first place, and that fence might become the boundary by operation of adverse possession. Same thing goes with lines of trees and hedges, or even people might place a shed on a neighbor's property. And that's in a city lot. The same thing, though, can happen with pasturing cattle or with fences for cropland. When a client or a potential new client comes to me and they think they have a boundary dispute or maybe an adverse possession situation, to start, I think the easiest way to think about it is you have to ask the basic questions: the who, what, when, where, why, and how. The who is really important. Who are the parties involved? And with adverse possession, it's not going to just be the current property owner necessarily. Do you have a governmental entity? Who owned that property 20 years ago? The what sort of property is involved? Is it hunting property, a city lot? Those are important things to know about property and deciding if you have adverse possession. When? Are we talking 20 years of adverse possession? Was it occupied between 1930, 1950? What time period? Where? How much property is involved? What is the actual boundary line that's in dispute? And why? There's a recent case, again, Wilcox versus the state of Hines, that told us it is important why you were possessing the property. Did you intend to possess it? Was it with the permission of the true owner? Did you think it was your property? And then very importantly, how? What were your acts of possession that constitute adverse possession? When I have all of that information, I sit down and I think, does this equal adverse possession? I compare it to the case law. And then I start to think about possible defenses. and different related doctrines maybe that could come into play, such as the doctrine of acquiescence or easements. Attorneys should know that the statute isn't going to answer their question in most cases. You need to look at the entire body of law that has developed over time. The adverse possession statutes actually codify the common law, and so there are different elements even in the cases than ours are listed even in the statute. So the elements of adverse possession are continuous, exclusive, open and notorious, and hostile possession, whereas there is no reference of most of those terms in the statutes themselves. Attorneys also need to know that you shouldn't just look at either the first case or even the last case. It's been a long and complex doctrine that has evolved over time, and a good place to start is probably the latest case, but there are plenty of cases from over 100 years ago that I still reference and that are still relevant good law that you will need to be aware of. Part of why I wrote my article is sometimes it's really hard to find a good summary of adverse possession law. A lot of the treatises will have it, but that's on a nationwide basis. And our state, along with a lot of other states, has developed the law in its own way. So I think the best way to sort of follow along and know what you should be looking at is to just go through the cases. You're going to have to do your case law research. Hopefully my article will give you a good starting point, but from there you just have to get into the topic.
So there you go, clear as mud. She tells you, but she gives you a good explanation from an attorney's point of view, how they approach doing the cases to claim adverse possession. All right, so
For an attorney,
let me just throw out there the morning poll. If everybody could answer that morning poll, please. Come on, guys. We got two more people. You got to answer the poll. All right, I guess not. So here's some criminals trying to think that they have a little bit of knowledge that they're going to take advantage of adverse possession.
A little bit more bizarre business story. We're going to talk about the headlines about the young man who moved into a $2.5 million mansion near Miami without paying a dime. We first told you about this story Friday morning, but we're now learning that this has become a national trend, and some of the people doing it are even connected to an anti-government group the FBI classifies as domestic terrorists. Boca Raton, one of the poshest zip codes in Florida, is abuzz this morning over what is happening inside this $2.5 million, 7,500 square foot waterside mansion. The bank foreclosed a couple of years ago, but now a 23-year-old named Andre Barbosa has simply moved in.
Nobody's happy. We all spent a lot of money to live on this street.
Barbosa is using an obscure legal concept on the books in every state called adverse possession, which says if you live in an empty home for a certain amount of time, it's yours. Adverse possession is being attempted all over America. Susan Weidman took over a series of homes in the Atlanta area.
I filed adverse possession back in February as Susan Weidman at the DeKalb courthouse. So I'm not just, transient squatter here.
This $3.3 million house near Raleigh, complete with an elevator, got caught up in this whole mess when Sean Pendergraft claimed he owned the house.
It's not a scam. Everything we're doing is lawful.
There have always been squatters, but the housing crisis has put the phenomenon on steroids. Some of the people using adverse possession are connected to a sometimes violent anti-government movement known as sovereign citizens. who believe U.S. laws do not apply to them.
A police officer walks up to someone who is claiming a house now belongs to him without any basis at all, is handed a big sheaf of documents which are incomprehensible, and I think very often the officers ultimately feel that they're forced to go back to headquarters and try and figure out what's going on before they can actually toss someone in the slammer.
I met a young sovereign named Robert Peterson who moved into this foreclosed home in Idaho.
They're the enemy. They're the enemy of anybody who wants to live free.
One expert on sovereigns found evidence to suggest that Andre Barbosa, in that mansion in Boca Raton, is connected to a sovereign group called Divine Province, based on the language Barbosa used to justify moving into the mansion and the fact that his name is on the group's website. Before you get any ideas about trying to use adverse possession, consider that the sheriffs forced Robert Peterson out of this house, and remember Susan Weidman, arrested for racketeering, and Sean Pendergraph, also arrested for obtaining property by false pretense.
All the legal arguments he may make or the documents he may file will all end up leading to the same conclusion, and that is that he gets kicked out because he has no legal right to be there.
As for Andre Barbosa, he may be running out of time in that mansion in Boca. Bank of America has now filed a claim in court claiming it is the rightful owner of the home.
It's so crazy that they're arguing that the law's on their side.
They are, and they're kind of 1/3 right.
Fascinating story. All right.
It is kind of crazy, isn't it? All right, let's see another one.
Now a warning about the risks more and more people are taking to get a house for next to nothing. It's an obscure law some hope to cash in on, but often land in jail instead. Our Chris Trankman joins us live in Polk County to explain more on this. Chris?
Well, the sheriff says some people never learn. This is the house in question. It's valued at $160,000. It's in foreclosure, and both deputies and residents here are baffled why a couple thought by breaking in, turning on the power, water, and cable, they would have the right to own the house without paying for it.
With the homes being vacant, it just takes neighbors in the neighborhood having their eyes and ears open.
Danny Rodriguez says residents along Echo Lane noticed a locksmith changing the locks and moving trucks unloading furniture into this vacant house. As the Homeowners Association president, familiar with his neighbors, Rodriguez suspected a scam.
I knew a little bit about adverse possession just from doing some research saying you need to be in the home for 7 years, and I knew they weren't here for 7 years.
Adverse possession is a Florida law from the 1800s that applies to unoccupied farmland. The property appraiser alerted sheriff's deputies about Sherry Fields and her husband after they filed for the obscure law. They were charged with burglary and grand theft. Meanwhile, Sherry Fields is a teacher at Fort Meade High School.
Come on, girl. You know, you got a college education. You should know better than that. But anyway, we gave her a field trip to the county jail.
Sheriff Grady Judd says more people are learning about adverse possession from websites online, mistakenly thinking they can use the law to take over an unoccupied house for free.
Of course, we all know if it's on the internet, it's got to be true. Well, what they didn't see on the internet was my Facebook page that says, "We will put you in jail."
You know, we work hard for our homes and what we have, and it's not fair for someone to just come in and take somebody's possession like that.
And the sheriff says the school teacher and her husband are going on another field trip, this time for a crash course on Florida law. They'll be in a courtroom tomorrow. We're live in Polk County. Chris Trankman, ABC Action News.
Now a warning about.
And another one.
Caught in the act, how one woman stopped a group of squatters from moving into a vacant home she owns. Good evening, I'm Jackie Parks.
And I'm Todd Carley, 23.
Now, this is a possibility that this could even happen in New Jersey, because this is in California, but New Jersey often follows suit with California and Illinois. New Jersey is a very liberal state, just like California and Illinois. And we're a very blue state, so we often follow their same laws. And New Jersey is, when it comes to renting, is a renter's right state. They value the renters. The law protects the renters more than it does the landlords for residential property, anyway. So there's these well-intentioned or meaning, but kind of misguided laws that give the benefit of the doubt to these renters who play the system to their favor here. And then it's next to impossible to get them out. You got to go through eviction to get people out. And
3ABC's Mark Christian is live tonight from a home in Oildale where those squatters were trying to take up residence. Mark?
Well, guys, if you think if someone is living in a home illegally, it'd be a simple case to get them out. Well, squatters move under the radar to try to move in very fast, and in some cases even changing the lock so they can move in before the owner finds out.
I saw like about 20 people at my property trying to move in as fast as they could.
After her previous tenant moved out, the home had only been vacant for 10 days.
Unfortunately, some of these squatters have gotten pretty sophisticated.
Rena Chanty was getting her home ready to put it up for rent when a neighbor called to tell her someone was trying to move in. The squatters were moving in a refrigerator, a washer and dryer.
Basically everything a house needs. They were even putting up their decoration pieces, and they had changed the locks.
When deputies arrived, the squatters were still in the process of moving in. Though not commenting on this specific case, Ray Pruitt with the Sheriff Department says squatters can take refuge under the California tenant law and have even been known to falsify rental agreements.
Once they're in that property, in some cases it's very hard to get them out of that property without legally evicting them.
In cases like this, law enforcement's hands are tied because if the squatter presents what appears to be a legal agreement, it comes down to he said, she said.
Sometimes we can't determine if the squatter's in the home legally or not.
They know the system and they know how to play the system.
Fortunately for Chandy, the squatters did not get that far and could not provide any documents to law enforcement.
At that moment, the cops told me it was my word against their word, and I had to prove that I owned the property, which I had the paperwork on me.
So right now, Chandy is checking her house daily until she can officially get it rented. In the meantime, she's asking her neighbors to keep a watchful eye until that place gets rented. Back to you, Jackie.
rented. What if you're on vacation and you're going to have squatters move into your house and do something like this? The same thing would apply. You wouldn't be able to get back into your house if you were away on vacation and some squatters moved into your house and then created a fake lease and said that they're the ones that are rightfully living there. How nutty is that? But the law's on their side.
Caught in the...
Here's another one. This is like those people online telling you that you could get rich with adverse possession. Get rich in real estate through adverse possession.
Well, how come you're running away from me? If it's all legal, stay and talk to me. There may be a good reason why this guy didn't want to stick around or explain how he helped two families move into this Coconut Drive house. Terrence Smiley tells me this man he knows as Encino Hernandez offered a deal on this house that was too good to pass up.
He say he have a house. Go check it out if you want it. We can do business.
Turns out the guy dashing off in a hurry doesn't own the house, but Smiley says that guy offered to rent the house to Smiley for $500 a month. The guy denies that. He claims he just charged Smiley $190 for advice about a form available at the property appraiser's office and a little-known law called adverse possession. Adverse possession allows someone to take ownership of abandoned property if they live on it and pay taxes on it for 7 years. What's happening in the Bay Area is a lot different. An 8 on Your Side investigation found some people are turning the adverse possession law into a money-making scheme, taking control of vacant properties and then renting them out.
Do you believe that you've committed any violation or crime or misdemeanor?
No. That's what Steve Bible told me more than 3 years ago. He moved 31 families into homes he didn't own, filed adverse possession papers, and collected monthly rent. He's now in prison, serving 5 years for fraud. The Hillsborough County property appraiser tells me there's been an explosion of adverse possession forms coming through his office in the past few months. So we set out to find out who's filing this stuff. We visited house after house after house, all of them listed on adverse possession forms we obtained from the appraiser. Most are vacant. But at this townhome, Alice Fugate had a big surprise after she signed a lease with the real homeowner.
We had squatters in here the day before we moved in.
These new renters found other people's stuff inside. And 2 doors down at another home on the adverse possession list, we found a cable TV installer waiting to do his job.
They can stay there if nobody kicks them out.
Stetson Law professor Daryl Wilson says adverse possession is a technically legal way to take over abandoned property if the right steps are followed.
You would think that the person who owns the property would come and police their property. The law helps those who help themselves.
Where we draw the line is breaking into somebody's home.
But the Hillsborough Sheriff's Office takes a hard line on adverse possession.
It belongs to somebody, so stay out of it. If you go inside of it, you break inside of it, we're going to arrest you for burglary and theft.
So you're the landlord here?
No, I'm not.
Then why'd you rent it to these guys?
I didn't rent it. They went down to the courthouse and did that.
This guy tells me he doesn't charge people like Terrence Smiley rent. They just pay him for his adverse possession expertise. He later agreed to talk to me, but the phone number he gave...
The mobile number you have called is no longer in service.
These tenants could end up in the cold. Detective McKinnon says the sheriff's office typically gives renters in adverse possession cases 30 days to move out.
Innocent families, it's just bull crap, man. Really bull crap. You work hard for your money.
In this case, and so many others, adverse possession adversely affects people's lives. Peter Bernard, News Channel 8.
Kind of crazy what people think they get away with, huh? Now, take a look at this case. This one is in Florida. This is a property line dispute. This is not this isn't one of those cases of adverse possession per se, but it could possibly lead to that if left long enough. So this person took action and put up a fence to protect his property line. The problem is now he's butting heads with a realtor who lives across the street, who also, I think, got this listing. So now she's all bent out of shape, sticking her nose in her business here, and she's got an interest in this. How's everybody liking these videos? Are they interesting or what?
They are. They're upsetting.
Yeah. Well, how about this one?
This is a wild story. New from Orlando, there are big questions tonight about what is going to happen to this house in Wadeview Park now that a boundary dispute has reached a whole new level. Check out this new fence. It splits a pool in two. Channel 9's Shannon Butler is live there in downtown Orlando. It's just south of downtown. And Shannon, this fence has neighbors scratching their heads and wondering what will happen next here.
Yeah, if you walk down this street here in Wadeview Park, it looks normal, right? There's a house on this lot. There's no house on this lot. But if you look behind the bushes here, you can see the guy without a house has put a fence on the guy with a house, making it clear where the property lines stand. Now everybody is asking, what's this guy do now? This home along Harding Street sat vacant for years, all because of a boundary dispute. The MLS listing says, quote, the pool and the garage are partially on the adjacent parcel and not included in this sale. Huh? It's such a mess that realtors don't even want to touch it. This realtor posting about it saying, quote, my job as a realtor is to help people buy and sell properties. Sometimes my job is to help people not to buy. So the house was just sold at an auction, and now what was a dispute has been taken one step further. The owner of this lot seemed to have put up a fence right through the pool of the other guy's lot, splitting the garage and that pool in half.
That's where we stand now. We have a brand new owner of this house, and this is how they choose to make their statement to the new owner.
Lisa Sconyers is a realtor and has lived across from the two properties for years. The history is long and sordid, but the easiest way to explain it is that both lots were owned by the same person, a house on each. He then sold them to the new owner, who then cleared the lots to build one big house. But that owner went into foreclosure and the lots were sold to two different people. So now this house is over the property line of the other lot. In the end, Sconyers says this could have all been avoided.
The city of Orlando didn't permit this the right way. What they should have made these people do is they should have made them replat the property into two separate properties. They never did that.
Now, we have reached out to both sides and the city. We're still waiting to hear back. Now, when it comes to this property here, This property owner is trying to get a petition. He's gone around to the neighbors, asking the neighbors to give him an exception to back it up because this lot isn't big enough for a house, to allow a house to be built there. Now the neighbors are saying, I don't know if I can back you on that because you asked us to do that before you did this, and this problem still isn't solved. We're live in Orlando. Shannon Butler, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
To me, it sounds like a realtor's causing a whole lot of drama here where a guy's just trying to protect his lot, you know?
News.
All right, so a party wall is a shared, okay, we're done with those videos for now. A party wall is a shared common wall that straddles the property line of two properties and separates them. Now, for attached housing, the common wall would be like where you have what do you call it? A duplex with a side-by-side unit, or townhouses. There's a party wall that's common, that's between the two different units of shared housing. But it could also be like in medieval times, it was a wall made out of stone that separated the boundary lines of two properties, two lots, okay? So it could be a wall in a house where you got multiple units attached to each other, or it can be a fence between two properties. So that's what a party wall is. Party wall of a building that straddles the boundary lines between two owners' lots. That's what a party wall is. It's on page 111 under the easement by prescription stuff. Okay. And we should already have this highlighted. Licenses are permission to enter the land of another for a particular purpose, a specific purpose. It's permission. It's not a right. It is permission to enter the land of another for a specific purpose. And permission can be revoked at any time. You know, you can't take away somebody's rights, but permission, that's a different story. They can take away permission that's been granted. So a party wall is a shared common wall and attached housing. Separates the two units. Licenses are permission to enter the land of another for a specific purpose. And then we have easements are rights to enter the land of another for a particular purpose. They could be added to the deed or a survey. It's often in writing, and they can't be taken away from you once it's been established that you have those rights. Encroachment is anything that crosses over a property line, like when a part of a building, fence, driveway, or other installation illegally extends beyond the owner's property onto the neighboring property. And here's a way to remember what an encroachment is. Much like it has the word roach in it, and much like a roach, it's something you don't want on your property. Okay. So how do you create an easement? Well, either by expressly granting permission by the property owner to someone else to cross over onto their property, by a deed when conveying real estate, creating an easement over the sold land, granting the new owner an easement over the grantor's remaining land, by long-time usage, like with an easement by prescription. However, this must be perfected in a court of law to make that claim. By necessity, when it's needed for the purpose of ingress and egress for landlocked properties to get on and off the property. And an easement in gross, which is a public utility easement. This is the only type of easement when the need for the easement no longer exists. The easement would cease to exist. Now, when they create an easement in gross, they could ask the owner for permission, or they could just take the land if it's needed for a greater good with just compensation paid to the owner using eminent domain. How do you terminate an easement? Well, when the purpose for the easement no longer exists. That only applies to an easement in gross, though. When the owner of the dominant or servient tenement becomes the owner of the other. You don't need an easement to cross over your own land. When the dominant estate releases the easement right back to the servient estate, they could give up their easement rights. Or by abandonment. However, keep in mind, courts have ruled that simple non-use does not constitute abandonment. You'd have to prove the person's intention was to abandon the property, and good luck with that. So let's highlight encroachments on page 112. This may look like an old screenshot, even though it's the right sentence there. Looks like it may be a little bit of older screenshot, so let me see if I got a newer screenshot to replace it with. Encroachment.
Got it. Got it.
All right. What? All right, and then deed restrictions. These are restrictions placed in deeds are called restrictive covenants. It's a restrictive legal promise that you agree to when you purchase the property. That's what a covenant is. Restrictions are placed in deeds by private parties, not by government. Government has their own powers on how they could restrict how you use your property, but deed restrictions are placed in properties by private parties, not by government. These are restrictive clauses that are added to deeds when the property is sold or conveyed to someone else, established by the seller to restrict the future owner's use of the property. And then that restriction runs with the land. It passes from one owner to the next, unless they put a sunset clause in there that says that this restriction will go away after a certain period of time. And then the type of estate and land that's based on a restriction is known as fee determinable, defeasible fee, or conditional fee estate. If you remember, we went over them in, let's see, page 104. That's where we went over those types of estates and land. So highlight here next to deed restrictions, write restrictive covenants, and highlight that and write these types of estates and land, and see page 104 about the types of restrictions in deeds.
Done.
All right, anybody still writing? Everybody got it?
Yes, I need a second, please.
Sure, sure, sure.
I got it. Thank you.
You're welcome. And that concludes this chapter 6. We'll have to do the key terms to review now. And there are 2 key terms to review in this chapter. Before we get started in them, on key terms 1, we're going to make some notes here, some modifications. It says next to letter A, ownership lasting indefinitely. We're going to cross out the word indefinitely and write forever or a lifetime.
Victor, hold on. I'm trying to find the page. 1 second.
Page 114.
Okay. And what was the change again? Sorry.
Next to letter A on key terms 1, we're crossing out the word indefinitely and we're writing forever or a lifetime above it.
Forever or a lifetime?
That is correct.
Okay.
Then next to letter E, at the end of the line where it says ownership as long as, you could also write based on a restriction. Based on a restriction. Next to letter E, where it says ownership as long as, right after that, based on a restriction. And then just below it, letter F, we're going to cross out where it says of ownership, and we're going to replace that with writing so that it reads amount or kind of interest in real property. Because it says amount of ownership, we're going to write amount or kind of interest. We're going to write or kind above where it says of ownership. We're going to write or kind of, and then at the end of the line, at the end of it there, we could squeeze in interest in real property. So it'll read amount or kind of interest in real property. And then over to key terms 2, letter D. Cross out the word lien and write legal action. And then in a bracket, write foreclosure. So notice that a legal action may be filed and then have foreclosure written at the end of the line.
Where is that again?
Key terms 2, letter D, where it says, notice that a lien may be filed, you're going to cross out the word lien and you're going to replace it with legal action and then write foreclosure in a bracket.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, and then next to letter J, we're going to cross out the word, it says third party who will gain eventual ownership. Cross out the word will, replace it with the word may, M-A-Y. So third party who may gain eventual ownership. And next to letter L, we're not crossing out anything. We're just trying to squeeze towards the front of that the word possible. So it reads, so I just wrote it above the word future. Possible future interest of an owner. All right, everybody got all those notes down?
Yes.
Then I guess we can get started. So, ownership lasting forever or a lifetime?
Freehold state.
16 is A, freehold estates, correct. Permanent right to use another's land. A permanent right to use another's land.
Easement.
6 is B, it's an easement. Husband's right in wife's property.
Courtesy.
Yes, courtesy. 3 is C. Simple right to use part of an adjacent parcel. What do we call a right to, they say simple. What do we call a right to use a part of an adjacent parcel?
Fee determinable.
That's a type of estate and land.
Oh.
When we talk about rights, what is a right? The easements, right? So we're talking about some sort of an easement. So which easement is a right to use part of an adjacent parcel? It's actually written, it has those words in the definition.
Easement appurtenant. I don't know how to pronounce that.
Easement appurtenant is correct. 7's D. Ownership as long as, or ownership that's based on a restriction. It has the words as long as you don't violate the restriction. What kind of ownership is based on a restriction?
State and land.
I'm sorry?
Estate on land.
Well, what kind of estate in land is based on a restriction? We are talking about an estate in land, but which one is based on a restriction? That you have you have ownership forever, but that ownership is based on a restriction. As long as you don't violate that restriction, you're an owner.
Is it fee determinable?
It is fee determinable, goes by fee determinable, conditional fee, or determinable, or defeasible fee estate. Correct. So 14 is E. 14 is E. Amount or kind of interest in real property. Amount or kind of interest in real property. I'm sorry, I did not get that. Whatever somebody was talking there.
So when I read like amount of ownership, I think estate and land.
And then that would be right.
Right, but as we change the definition, I get a little confused.
Well, an estate and land describes the amount and kind of interest that one has in real property. Now, they wrote here in the book amount of ownership, well, it's not just ownership, because aren't there estates and land that don't describe ownership? It's just that this particular chapter described it as ownership. And I had you cross that word out at the beginning of the chapter as well when we put that in the definition, because I gave you a more correct definition, which was the amount or kind of interest that one has in real property would be an estate and land. Because we don't just have freehold estates, we have less than freehold estates, which are leasehold estates. So it's not just about ownership. That's why the ownership was crossed out. So 13 is F, an estate in land. That is correct. A right used for utility lines on another's land.
Easement and gross.
An easement and gross, it's a utility easement. 10 is G. A right of access to a landlocked parcel.
Easement by necessity.
8 is H, correct. Wife's right in her husband's property.
Dower.
Dower. 5 is I. A right sometimes acquired through usage. That's the only way you can acquire it, is through usage.
Easement by prescription.
9 is J, correct.
Yeah.
Transfer by sale or gift.
Convey.
To convey. 2 is K. Property that benefits from an easement.
Dominant state.
The dominant estate. 4 is L. Most complete ownership of land possible.
Fee simple.
15 is M. Fee simple. Any easement, encroachment, etc. They're all examples of
encumbrance.
They're all encumbrances. 12 is N. Place against real estate by a worker who has not yet been paid.
Construction lien.
A construction lien, which also goes by the words mechanics lien. So 1 is O, correct. Building intruding on another's land.
Encroachment.
It is. 11 is P, encroachment. That's key terms 1. We're done with that. Now let's do key terms 2. Structure owned by 2 adjoining landowners.
Party walls.
A party wall. 9 is A, correct. Claim against all property someone owns. Claim against all the property that someone owns.
General lien.
1 is B, a general lien. A claim against one parcel of real estate. Only one parcel of real estate. A specific lien. 14 is C. A notice that a legal action may be filed. That legal action being foreclosure.
Lis pendens.
A lis pendens. 7 is D. Lender's claim against real estate.
Lien.
Be a little more specific.
Mortgage lien.
A mortgage lien.
Mortgage lien, yeah.
E. Temporary permission. Permission being the key word there. Temporary permission.
License.
It is a license. 4 is F. A right to use and possess for a
4
limited
is F. I'm sorry. 4 is F.
4 is F. It is a license. Temporary permission is a license. A right to use and possess for a limited time. What gives you the right to use and possess someone's property for a limited time? A right to use and possess it for a limited time.
Give me the options now. I do not have the book.
It's a leasehold estate. A leasehold. 3 is G. Right? You have the right to use and possess for a limited period of time someone else's property. It's a leasehold estate. 3 is G. Property taxes are one example. So property taxes are one. Do property taxes create a lien on a property? If they do, what kind of lien is it?
Mortgage.
Property taxes.
Mortgage.
Property taxes. Property taxes. What kind of lien do a property taxes create on a property? Is it
Voluntary lien?
Is it voluntary or is it involuntary? Do you want to pay taxes?
It is voluntary lien.
It is. You want to pay taxes? You went out of your way to get that bill?
No, we don't want to pay taxes.
So then what kind of lien is it?
Involuntary lien?
Involuntary lien, correct. 2 is H. The order in which liens are paid. What determines the order in which liens are repaid? You know, in the event of foreclosure, what determines the order in which liens are paid?
Priority?
They get paid back according to their priority. 10 is I. Third party who may gain eventual ownership.
Remainder man?
A remainder man. You can't say they will gain eventual ownership except in the case of a life estate, but in other situations where you name a remainder man, where it would only apply if a condition was violated, then that would be may and not will. So it doesn't always it's not always that they will gain eventual ownership. It depends on what situation you're talking about. So third party who may gain eventual ownership would be a remainder man. 11 is J. The tract over which an easement runs. What do we call the tract of land over which an easement runs?
Servient estate.
It is the servient estate. 13 is K. Possible future interest of an owner. Possible future interest of an owner.
Reversionary interest.
It is. It's a reversionary interest. 12 is L. Adding successive periods of usage.
Tacking.
Tacking. You're tacking on one person's time to that of another to reach that prescriptive period. Correct. 15 is M. Complete ownership until someone's death.
Life estate.
6 is N. The life estate would be correct. Financial claim against real estate.
Voluntary lien.
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 There's a general lien.
A financial claim against real estate. Doesn't seem like they're giving you enough information to tell what kind of lien. So therefore, it is simply a lien. 5 is O. Mortgage or equity loan, for example.
Voluntary lien.
The voluntary lien. You went out of your way to get that mortgage loan, so therefore it's voluntary. 16 is P. And that concludes, let me make sure. Yep, no more key terms. That concludes chapter 6.
Which one is number 8?
Okay, hold on one sec. 8 was E as in Edward. For key terms 2 you're talking about?
Yes.
Yep, 8 is E, correct.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.